Good morning, everybody. Welcome. Thank you for being here today. We're going to take today to talk about the release of the FY22 request for proposals for the landscape scale restoration LSR, Western States Fire Managers, WSFM, and the hazard fuels reduction HFR grants that are administered by the Forestry Assistance Bureau here at the Idaho Department of Lands. A couple of technical announcements to go over. We have placed everybody on mute to help reduce any background noise. If you do have a question during the presentation, please feel free to post questions in the chat box and we'll address all the questions at the end of the presentation. And we are going to post a recorded PowerPoint version of this presentation at a later date, and that'll be posted to our website. Couple other things, if you are experiencing any technical difficulties, Tyra and I are sitting here, and go ahead and put those questions or concerns in the comment box and we'll try and get to those as soon as we can. And with that, we will get started. For those of you that I haven't met yet, my name is Corey Ivy and I am the new but not so new anymore grant project coordinator for the Idaho Department of Lands. I started back in March of this year, and I'm basically the primary point of contact for the proposal and application phases of these different grant programs. I'm the one that primarily will work with those of you who have applications that are selected to continue into the application phase of this process. My supervisor, Tyra Hofeltz, is sitting here next to me, and I'll let him make his introduction.
Good morning, everybody. Tyra Hofeltz. I am the Wildfire Risk Mitigation Program Manager here at Idaho Department of Lands. Many of you know who I am as we've interacted over the years, and I will continue to be a primary point of contact to assist in grant development with Corey, as well as project layout and development and meeting facilitation and so forth and so on. So if you need something related to wildfire, go ahead and reach out and we'll see if we can help you out.
Perfect. Okay, moving right into things. Quick overview of the IDL grant programs. These funds are regional-based funds, and they come to us from the U.S. Forest Service State and Private Forestry Branch. Idaho competes with 17 Western states and the Pacific Islands under the LSR and Western State Fire Manager grants. And then HFR grants, they're ranked and scored individually within regions 1 and 4, and I'll let Tyra add to that a little bit. And we'll cover the process for submitting these proposals and applications throughout this presentation, as well as the timeline that's associated with them.
For those who aren't familiar with these three grants, they all come from our Forest Service partners, so we want to acknowledge them in this process and thank them for providing the funding that makes possible the grant projects and programs. The Western State Fire Managers and the Landscape Scale Restoration grants are specifically competitive between, as was mentioned, the 17 Western states, and it is a highly competitive process. And so there's quite a back and forth that will happen with these applications if you choose to submit one, in order to create the most competitive application that we can to receive the highest ranking possible within those review processes there. The HFR, that's a program that I administer with my local counterparts in regions 1 and 4. And if you're interested in how that process rolls out, we'll give you some more details further in the presentation.
Okay, before we expand on the information related to these grants, there are a couple of different resources that we believe you should really have in your back pockets when you start considering submitting proposals for each of these different funding sources. The first one is the Idaho Department of Lands Forestry and Fire Grants webpage. This is where the proposal packets are currently located for you to download in order to start your proposals. There's also a lot of other information related to these programs in here. This year, like I mentioned, the proposal packets are going to look a little bit different, or they do look a little bit different. We'll discuss that a bit later. So this is definitely a resource that you'll want to keep handy as you work through this process. The second resource online that you'll want to probably spend a good deal of time exploring is the Forestry Grants website. This is the portal that's open to the public, and this is where the actual final applications for LSR and Western State Fire Managers are submitted. And here is where you would have the ability to explore past applications for both of those two grants. The applications are for all the Western states, so it's not just Idaho. And we'll recommend looking at primarily Idaho's previously submitted applications, so you can get a feel for what they look like and what the final application will look like. It is similar to the proposal, but there are a little bit of variations between the two. More importantly, take a look at the feedback from the reviewers and use those scores and comments to help better develop your project proposals. The website's user-friendly, but if anybody needs any assistance in navigating it, please feel free to reach out and let us know, and we'll help walk you through it. Okay, the process. As mentioned previously, we're going to provide an overview of the process that's involved with this cycle. It's best described in 3 stages, and you can see that here on the slide. You've got the proposal phase, the full application phase, and then the ideal submission phase when we submit it for Western competition. The first step in the process is the development and the submission of the project proposal. Questions that are listed on the proposal documents are based on questions that are outlined on previous year's final grant application and guidance. We don't anticipate major changes to the guidance year to year, but we actually put these project proposals out there for you to submit to us before the current year guidance is provided. So that's why we have the previous year's guidance attached. Make sure that the guidance is thoroughly reviewed, and when the new guidance comes out, we review that thoroughly. We do a side-by-side comparison, and then we make any notifications as needed if there's some significant changes. The next phase is the full application phase. Between the proposal phase and the application phase, IDL reviews the submitted project proposals for completeness and eligibility, and then we provide them to the Idaho Lands Resource Coordination Council for review and selection of the projects that'll move forward into full grant applications and final competition. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. Full applications are developed under a coordinated effort between the selected proposing grantees and the Idaho Department of Lands. The final phase is a submission phase. The projects that are moved forward into the application phase are then submitted for competition. And like I said, Western State Fire Managers and LSR are submitted to the forestrygrants.gov website, and the HFR ones are done here regionally, locally within Idaho. So here's a further breakdown of the timeline for what that process looks like. I'm not going to go through this box by box, but there's a couple of things that I want to note here. The proposals have been posted to the website, so you're free to go in and actually start your proposals. The big date on this page that I want you to take note of is January 22nd, 2021. That is when the project proposals are due to the Idaho Department of Lands, and we ask that those are turned in by 5 p.m. Pacific Standard Time on the 22nd. You'll notice that the proposals aren't presented to ILRCC until February, and that's because we have to take time to go through and review them all for eligibility requirements before we move them to ILRCC. ILRCC receives them, we go over them with them leading up to and on our meeting date in February. And then the projects that are chosen to move forward into full grant applications are developed in that coordinated effort between March and approximately September, and that can change a little bit year to year, but that's the general time frame. Between October and December, that's when that's after the applications have been submitted and when we start reviewing them, or when the Western States grant review process takes place. And then after that, it's a period of notifications that will eventually lead up to those that are selected for full funding or partial funding, I guess, are notified. So again, this is an approximate timeline. This is generally as close as it gets, but year to year, especially with this year in COVID, we do sometimes see a little bit of variation in these dates. Okay, eligibility and funding. So eligible applicants for all three of these grants are state and local agencies here in Idaho, tribes, nonprofits, educational institutions. Be sure that you read the eligibility criteria and the guidance documents within each of the proposal packets carefully. One of the grants here does require that a project area has a proximity to federal lands, and it's a 1.5 mile adjacency rule. We'll talk about that when we get to that specific program. But basically what this is or what this means is that although all of these, although state, local agencies, tribes, these are all eligible applicants, there are further eligibility requirements that you will need to be aware of. Funding wise, $300,000 is available for each grant. What that breaks down to is actually $240 is contracted to the grantee, $60 is designated for our grant administration portion on the IDL side. And we will again further address the budget later with the proposal packets. The most important thing to note about these funds is that they're provided on a reimbursement basis only. And what that means is that a request for reimbursement must be submitted to the Idaho Department of Lands with proof of payment to the vendor contractor. Before fundings will be provided to the grantee, the Idaho Department of Lands will review the request to make sure the costs are allowable and allocable. And these grant funds, essentially, they're not provided upfront. They're not cash grants, etc. So if there are any questions about the reimbursement basis, please reach out to us before you develop those proposals. Keep in mind, though, that grantees are allowed to request reimbursement throughout the entire project period. So there's not an expectation that the whole $240,000 is fronted on the grantee's side. Historically, there were some options for payment to the grantee before paying for the grant activities, but we are no longer able to provide funding in that way. So again, reach out if there's questions or concerns, and would be more than happy to further discuss this. I am going to turn it over to Tyre. We're going to tackle the match and leverage portion.
There are three different types of project funding seen across these grant programs: grant funds, match funds, and leverage funds. Biggest question often asked about match and leverage funding is, what is the difference? And you can see on the screen here some bullet points related to match and leverage. So first, let's take a look at the match funds. Match funding comes in the form of other non-federal grants, cash or in-kind services that are eligible associated with the specific grant activities. This means that in order for the funds to be considered matched, they must be paying for activities that the grant considers eligible. Examples would be using Title III Secure Rural School funding for right-of-way work. Eligible sources of funding eligible under Washington State Fire Managers also are considered eligible under LSR. So reiteration, they cannot be federal in nature. Leverage is basically everything else. So it is the value associated with the contributions made by the proposing grantee and their project partners to meet mutual project outcomes. Leverage is above and beyond match in the case of LSR and HFR, and it is desired that it be 1-to-1, but is not required. For HFR, leverage is highly encouraged. This value can come from federal sources and may fund activities items outside our grant authorities. For example, these grant funds cannot pay for a culvert in any way, but the costs associated with installation or purchase can be considered and used as leverage to increase the value and contributions to the project. A few more notes. When LSR and WSFM projects are submitted, they require 1-to-1 match. HFR does not have a match requirement. We have grantees, we ask that grantees provide 10% of that match, and IDL will provide the rest. An example of how this match funds are calculated is that $240,000 is what will be entered into if an award is made to a cooperator, which means that $24,000 would be the required match for the LSR or WSFM project types. Really what the bottom line is that establish your partnerships and figure out what you're going to do ahead of time, which will help you identify shortfalls in match and opportunities in leverage.
I think that covers it. Again, this is sometimes the most confusing part of applications. At least that's what I came across this year when I was working through them with our cooperators. So if there's any questions about match and leverage and how each of those play in individually in any of these two grant programs, reach out, ask questions. Our contact information is going to be provided at the end of the presentation, so you guys can email us with anything that you have in regards to anything that we're covering here. Okay, so a little bit about project planning, and before we start jumping into the packets, there's a few items of importance that I kind of want to talk about in regards to planning the projects, because it really is important that there are some steps that are covered before deciding to submit a project proposal. As mentioned back on slides 4 and 5, we really recommend that both the IDL webpage and the forestrygrants.org page be a guide in developing the proposals. Don't reinvent the wheel is something that I like to refer to when it comes to these. Referring to the prior applications that scored very well and specifically looking at the details in each box can help guide the development of your proposals. With that in mind, there's a couple of steps that I wanted to share that we encourage you to use when you start looking at developing your proposals. First, we really encourage that proposing grantees hold a series of planning meetings. Invite potential partners, and these potential partners might be subject matter experts, and they could provide other values to the project. In these planning meetings, identify issues that drive the need for the project. Why is the project important? What objectives might need to be met to address the issues? And then figure out who's doing what specifically. And this actually might end up with you identifying gaps in partnerships. And so this could lead to further coordinating with different stakeholders to try and fill those gaps. And those gaps could be subject matter expertise, they could be funding. So that's why planning meetings are truly an important part of diving into these projects. Also talk about possible costs associated with the project, where specifically the project needs to take place, and what landowner types are going to be included. Landowner types are very important when it comes to these projects. And you'll see specifically with LSR that there's actually some cross-boundary requirements that you'll have to dive into. So really pay attention to what landowner types you will have involved in the project. Secondly, don't reinvent the wheel. Like I said, use what you've got. Use already available data. Use already available assessments, maps, and prioritize. Use the maps to prioritize and support the needed work. And if these aren't readily available, look for options for obtaining the information. There might be other grants out there that can cover preliminary assessment type of work. I've done a little bit of research into all the various grant opportunities that are out there. So if you have any questions about grant options, let me know. Lastly, determine what actions or activities need to take place to address the issues that you've identified, and what those actions need to be in order to meet the objectives. The proposals need to show measurable outcomes and milestones, and that's across all three of them. And those measurable outcomes and milestones are what help prove the potential for success of the project. These steps are not limited to the proposal stage. Keep these steps in mind throughout the entire development of your project, all the way through the application phase if your project is chosen to move forward into that phase. And again, these aren't required. These are just some things that we really encourage, and we find that in moving through steps like these or these steps, our partners seem to be more successful in their proposals. So if there are any questions, feel free to reach out and contact us, and again, we can help walk through any of this. I'm
going to add a note to that last slide just quickly, that the inclusion of partners in that process, you're more than welcome to reach out to Corey or I in any of and all of those discussions. We're more than happy to engage with those. Put that plug in. The Idaho Forest Action Plan is a required document that IDL has put together and to meet national objectives of working across ownerships and vegetation types and issues throughout Idaho. What it encapsulates is a modeling effort to identify threats and benefits to Idaho's forests within the state, and then establish a strategy to address the threats and increase the benefits associated with our forest. In that, you will find goals and objectives. Those goals and objectives must be referenced in the Western State Fire Managers and in the LSR applications. And you can find these two documents posted to IDL's webpage. They're fairly sizable in their length, so be prepared to have a good read because they are well written. I want to put that plug in there. Thanks very much. Really what's important is that in the document, you'll find this map, the associated priority landscape areas and special landscape areas. So your project must be within one of these areas in order to qualify for the Western State Fire Manager or for the landscape scale restoration grant applications. It is a requirement of those grants that your projects fall within one of these designated areas. If you have a question of whether or not your project is within one of these and you're having a hard time identifying that, please reach out to Corey or I and we will help you figure that out.
And one last plug on this previous page, when we post a recorded version of this PowerPoint to the website, there is a hyperlink down here at the bottom, 2020 Idaho Forest Action Plan website hyperlink, and the new 2020 Forest Action Plan has been posted to the website, and so you'll be able to follow this link if you haven't been able to navigate there on your own after this presentation. Okay. Moving forward into the proposal packet. So as mentioned, the packets do look a little bit different this year. And the remainder of this presentation is going to talk about the individual grants and the packets associated with them. So quick run through on what these packets look like. There's a handful of forms associated with each of the packets, and each of the packets does look a little bit different in regards to what forms are attached. So we will run through those real quick before jumping into the individual programs. The first form that you will see on the project proposal packets is an acknowledgements form. This is a brand new form for this year, and this is to help lessen the questions that come up in regards to some of the eligibility requirements on our end for who's eligible and what you need to have in order to come to the table and apply for one of these grants. The acknowledgement form must be initialed and it must be signed by an authorized representative of the proposing organization or agency upon submission of the proposal. The form covers and requires acknowledgement of various terms such as OMB requirements, reimbursement terms, and direct costs, match, and a few others. And again, it has to be initialed line by line, and the second page must be signed at the bottom there by an authorized signer of your organization or agency. So each of the packets includes this form at the very front. The second form that you will find in the packet is a budget development guideline and restrictions. And this expands on some of the topics that are covered in the acknowledgement form, and it kind of gives a little bit further detail into those topics. There's some other information included, including flat fees, contractor costs, Again, further in depth on the indirect costs, personnel costs. There's a lot of great information in here, and this is a really good resource to use for the development of your budgets as they relate to the proposals. If there are any questions surrounding the information in these documents, please reach out and ask questions. It is easier for us to address the questions up front when it comes to starting to develop your proposals than to try and go back and do it afterwards. So again, use these, keep these handy throughout the entire process. And again, that budget development guideline is in all 3 of the proposal packets. The next page that you will find in the LSR packet is the national guidance. This guidance document is very, very important for those interested in submitting an LSR proposal to read through. It contains everything you need to be able to fill out the project proposal. So with LSR, you have national guidance, and then with LSR and the Western State Fire Manager, you have a Western guidance document. The Western guidance further breaks down the national guidance and more refines it to Western specific requirements. So use the national guidance as your guide for LSR, and then also use the Western guidance for some more specific information for the LSR side. And then for Western State Fire Managers, the Western guidance is the only guidance document. So there are 2 separate documents for each of the grant programs. Keep them handy, use them, read them thoroughly, and refer to them often when you're developing the project proposals, because again, they really contain everything that you need to be able to put a great project proposal together. For HFR, there is not a guidance document, but HFR is quite similar to the Western States Fire Managers Grant, and so you can actually use the Western guidance for WSFM to kind of help walk you through HFR, and Tyra's going to talk a little bit more about HFR towards the end of this presentation in regards to the guidance. Okay, the last document that you will find in the packet is the proposal document. This is a PDF document, and we'll actually zoom in and take a quick look at the 3 different ones throughout the rest of the presentation. So that again is the last document that you will find in this packet. These packets are compiled into a single PDF, and they are posted to the IDL website. So the website resource that was provided at the beginning of the presentation is the location of where these packets are. So if you have any issues in finding these packets, or if they're not working for you or anything of the sorts, please feel free to reach out, shoot us an email, and we'll make sure that you guys get the packets that you need for the specific grant you're looking at. Okay, so moving forward, we will go ahead and start diving into the grant specific proposals. The first one that we're going to look at is probably, well, it is by far the most in-depth and complicated of the 3 proposals. It is twice the length, I believe, of the other project proposals. And so this one definitely requires more information in regards to project planning. And it's more scaled towards landscape restoration in regards to the type of program it is. The landscape scale restoration program purpose statement directly out of the guidance reads that it's to encourage collaborative science-based restoration of priority forest landscapes. Again, that's directly from the national guidance for FY21, and that is, again, the current guidance for this project proposal. As noted on the slides, IDL is able to submit a total of 5 applications, as well as 2 applications direct from a tribal entity, and that makes the total submittals allowed from Idaho 7. We are not aware of any year in which that many proposals have been submitted. They actually increased the allowed number of proposals in the last couple of years, but I believe 5 is the most that we've ever seen submitted to us. We will likely never see more than 2 applications actually be funded, and that is because of funding cap limitations. So even though we can submit that many, there is no guarantee, and it will likely not happen that we actually see more than 2 of our applications funded for LSR. LSR projects need to address the national themes of protect, enhance, and conserve, as well as the landscape objectives. And those landscape objectives are further addressed in the guidance document. These themes and the landscape objectives are the basis for which our FAP goals and objectives were formed. And with this in mind, all of the projects, all of the proposals must align with the FAP goals and objectives for this grant. So what is an LSR project? It is innovative, and by that we mean that innovative projects are sought that integrate various programs, so whether that's forest health, urban and community, stewardship, fire, and they integrate other partners. Successful project proposals cross any combination of ownerships, management, or jurisdictional boundaries. They expand project outcomes at watershed, regional, and state levels. For example, within a priority landscape area, or PLA, multiple landowners, landowner types, and organizations might work together towards a common goal. As noted on the slide, federal partners make great partners, but these funds cannot be spent on federal lands. As mentioned earlier, ties to the Forest Action Plan, or FAP, are required. Successful project proposals address the Forest Action Plan issues, goals, and objectives. Again, we can't reiterate that enough. And they might also tie into other plans. So if you're from IDFG, it could be your State Wildlife Action Plan, and there are many others out there, but that's not a requirement, but it is an added and something you can definitely add to the project proposals. The biggest takeaway for LSR is that you'll need to plan for a cross-boundary and landscape level actions. Think multiple ownerships, and that will truly help the success of your proposal. Couple of different types of projects. One example that recently we saw is an aspen regeneration project that was dealing with the removal of encroaching conifer. There are a ton of different types of projects. This list is not all inclusive, but it does give you some examples. Maybe you're looking to restore forest health. You could be looking to restore some air and water resources. Riparian areas are a big one, wildlife habitat. You can actually use LSR for wildfire reduction as well, so just keep that in mind. Western State Fire Management and HFR aren't your only ones, just that LSR is a much broader scale. So keep these different types of projects in mind, but again, this is not all inclusive. Couple other types of projects. When we think innovative, you can kind of come up with quite a few different ones. So working on projects that have helped to affect policy changes, definitely innovative. And that's one that if you're curious about, you could reach out to Tyre and he can talk to a couple of previous projects that were submitted that surround that. And that has to do with working on air quality concerns. So think innovation, and you should see success with your project proposals. Couple of funding restrictions. So this list is not all inclusive. If there are specific questions about what we can and cannot pay for with this grant, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. There is an urban restriction that was recently put in place for LSR, and what that means is that the funds cannot be used for a project in an urban area with a population greater than 50,000. So this does take out a few of our areas. Greater Boise is one that is no longer eligible. The funds cannot be used for work on federal land. Again, we mentioned that earlier. Partner with federal entities, but cannot spend the money on federal land. The federal partners make great technical experts too. So if you're looking for a way to do some comparable work to what they've done, or you're looking to kind of learn from some of the projects that they've implemented on the ground, they're a great partner to keep in mind for that type of work. LSR funds cannot be used on research. If there are questions about what constitutes as research, please reach out, ask questions, and we will help with that. Construction activities are also ineligible. One of the toughest LSR funding restrictions that we see issues arise with in proposals is that the funds cannot pay for any activities in water. For example, a recent proposal, which is now an application from this previous year, involved reconnecting some river channels and using root wads on riverbanks for bank stabilization efforts. Those activities are not eligible for LSR funding. We can pay for like willow planting and cottonwood planting and those types of things on the banks, but we can't put root wads in the water against the banks. So just keep that in mind. There are other options for that type of work, and just because those activities aren't eligible to be paid for with LSR doesn't mean they can't be part of your project. In fact, incorporating multiple types of funding and multiple aspects to a project, including those that are ineligible, makes for a much broader project. And with LSR, that's a good thing. So just keep in mind, you can't pay for it with LSR, but it can definitely be part of the overall project. And there are actually some really great examples of how that was incorporated in previous projects. So if you go back to that forestrygrants.org website and take a look at some of the past LSR applications, you can see where they've had success in submitting applications with eligible and ineligible funds using match and leverage to help support that. These are not all of the restrictions. These are just some of the biggest ones that we most often see. So refer to the guidance document again in the proposal packets for some further information. Okay, I am going to jump into the project proposal. And if for some reason you cannot see this on your end, please shoot us a note in the comments box and we will do what we can to correct that. Right now, you should be seeing a web page with the PDF document. And yep, it looks like it's good to go here. So real quickly, I don't want to go through the entire application because it is 10 pages long, but there are a couple of things I want to note. You'll notice that there's an administrative use only box at the top. That is exactly what that is. This will auto-populate, so you don't have to worry about that. And that administrative use only box will actually occur across the top of all 3 different grant proposal documents. You'll also see that some of the boxes are outlined in red. These are required boxes on each of the proposals. So here for LSR, we've got to have the applicant information, we got to have the descriptive title of the project, and a couple others. For this year, something new on the proposal is that we've actually got boxes for partnering agencies and organizations. In previous years, there was a small line of space and it was really difficult to add all of the names of the partners. And when it comes time for those proposals to move to the application phase and then to the submission phase, we've got to have all the names of those partners. So utilize these boxes. Only one is in red because I don't know if you'd actually need to, but use these boxes to list out all of your partners for the specific project. Although the project duration boxes are not in red, we do still need you to select one of them. So keep that in mind. And then as far as the multi-state project, it's likely the case that your project is not multi-state, but if you have questions about that, please reach out and we can discuss that further. The last thing I want to cover is the GIS coordinates. In this box, there are 2 different options that you can choose from. You can pick either a center point of your project area, or you can actually create a polygon and give us a full-blown area of where your project is going to occur. So you will need to pick one of those 2 options for describing where your project is located. The rest of this application is narrative, and you'll find that there are instructions at the top of each of the boxes that further describe what is needed in each corresponding box. There will be some overlap, and what that does is it allows for you to further expand upon your project as you get deeper and deeper into the project proposal. So pay close attention to the boxes at the top, but then also always refer back to your guidance documents when you develop these proposal applications, because that truly is where you're going to find what needs to be placed in each of your proposals. And I will turn it over to Tyre to add any additional comments.
The more details that you can provide in these boxes that require narration in them, the easier it is for us to ask intelligent questions back to you so that we get the appropriate details for inclusion in the application to create, again, the most competitive application that we can. So again, more is better than less at this point. It doesn't mean that you have to fill up the entirety of the box, but definitely more detail is better than less.
Yes. When it comes time to push these forward to ILRCC, and then again, if it's chosen to move beyond that, there is a lot of back and forth and a lot of collaboration that needs to happen. So more is less. Just pay attention to the character limits, because these boxes will actually limit you to the amount of characters specified in the instructions. Okay, we'll jump back into the presentation, and I'm going to turn it over to Tyre to talk about Western states.
We are able to submit 10 applications through the Western State Fire Managers Grant Program process. And it's really important to note that even though we can submit 10, the probability of having more than 7 funded is very, very low. Again, that's due to a funding cap limitation associated with that particular program. So we will do our best to create 10 very fully competitive applications, but there is a high probability that only 7, if funding is recommended, will be recommended for funding. The 3 types of projects that are covered under the Western State Fire Managers Grant are fuels, which is the modification of vegetation for the reduction of fire risk potential to communities and developments and landscapes. The other is outreach, prevention, education types of projects. So these are your traditional Smokey Bear, Firewise. You're gathering people together and you're sharing details of information to increase the base knowledge for the public. And lastly, we have planning efforts that can be funded, specifically the county wildfire protection plans, and all of the associated pieces that go into that, which include assessments and some monitoring aspects. Please. So who can apply? This is the same as the landscape scale restoration grants. It's basically any governmental organization, nonprofit, or educational institution can apply, and it is related to your ability to implement projects. So if you're looking for Western State Fire Managers grants, you're looking for dollars to implement projects. So we're talking about capturing widgets of whatever it is, acres or people, taught, plans completed, so forth and so on. We'll move to this one. So what constitutes a fuels project? These projects must be explicitly identified in the county wildfire protection plan. So what I mean there is that we're not talking about just doing general fuels reduction in the county. It needs to be at community X, likely on Y street for said distance, working with so many partners and identifying which funding sources. So we're looking for very explicitly identified projects from CWPPs. So if your CWPP is not up to date and does not include a project that you'd like to work on, you're welcome to reach out to me, and I'm happy to help facilitate the update of that particular project into a CWPP. If you're wondering who manages those, for the most part, here in Idaho, that's done through the emergency managers within the various counties. Outreach and prevention, as I previously mentioned, include school education types of projects, going to fairs with booths or events, HOA meetings, and social media. Again, these projects need to be explicitly identified. So it's the audience, the location, the time, the who, and the how. Next, please. CWPPs, we can use these fundings to identify needs for the development of community wildfire protection plans that can be nested inside of county wildfire protection plans if a community desires to do that, or if a county is in need of updating their county wildfire protection plan, these dollars can be used to update those plans, which includes the the all hazard plans. So if you're not aware, between Idaho Department of Lands and Idaho Office of Emergency Management, we have an agreement in place that allows us to integrate the county wildfire protection plan into the county all hazard mitigation plans. So if you would like to do that, you can seek funding to include the fire section explicitly into the hazard mitigation plan or as an appendice. Now, the funding cannot be used to update the entire plan, just the wildfire portion of that plan. What can't we do with these things? We do not fund specific and standalone defensible space types of projects. We also cannot fund maintenance on federally funded projects. So if you've obtained an HFR, LSR, WSFM application and you want to go back and do some maintenance on that particular project, and it's exactly the same activity that you did previously with those funds, it cannot be done with these dollars in the realm of maintenance. We cannot fund preparedness or suppression capacity building, meaning not positions, not PPE, and not toys and tools. So we're talking fire engines here, folks, and things like that. We can't do small business startup, nor can we develop GIS or database types of programs. Corey's going to talk about the application and some changes that we have instituted for this coming year.
Okay, again, if you are unable to see this, please let me know and we can make some changes here. So, excuse me, at this point, you should be seeing the project proposal document PDF. The biggest thing I want to draw your attention to is the instructions at the top in red and blue. Specifically the blue ones. Hover over each active field for additional guidance and instructions. PDF and Adobe and other PDF programs have this great tool where you can do hover over text. If you hover over the top of the box, it will give you further instructions on what needs to go in that box. So for here, for the cooperator organization, it is the name of the individual or the agency that is submitting this proposal. So again, if you are looking for additional instructions, move your cursor over the top of the box and it will provide you some additional information. The applicant information does not change. You cannot change these boxes. We have inputted tires information in here, and this is who the official applicant is if it moves to that stage. We also will need the some information about the project, the name, the community names, counties, and the congressional district. And then lastly, the GIS coordinates is the same as with LSR. You need to pick one of the two options for telling us where your project is located. I didn't cover this in the LSR proposal, but one thing to note is with the applicant budget, you'll see that the grant funds requested column is locked and set at certain dollar amounts. And that is because in the end, the money that would be applied or that would be provided to on a reimbursement basis to the proposing grantee is this 240 contractual that you see here under the grant funds requested. So if you're talking about applying for money to pay for travel, or if you're talking about applying for money to pay for any other personnel costs associated with your agency, it's all going to go under contractual, and that is how we break down the budget tables here. Applicant match and non-federal contributor match, these are the two boxes that you have the ability to fill in. And do remember that with Western States and LSR, there is a requirement for a 1-for-1 or a 50% match. So if it's that 240, there has to be 24,000 total in the match columns. Something different than what the LSR grant is with Western State Fire Manager, you're actually going to see some of these boxes partly populated for you, and that's because we've worked through different years of applications, and we've kind of came down to a mad science, I guess you could say, of how we piece these boxes together for clarity. You'll see, again, if you hover over the box, that further information will pop up with instructions. These instructions again, they're important for the boxes, but always refer back to the guidance document as well. So don't forget that part. If you hover over this, you'll see that some of this will actually tell you, do not alter the text that's already in the box. It'll be pretty clear when we want you to change things, add the name of the cooperator and stuff like that. But for the most part, you'll see that some of these boxes, format-wise and content-wise, as far as what needs to be included, have already been placed in here for you. If you have any questions about what's in here, again, reach out and we'd be more than happy to walk through the development of this with you. Tyler, did you want to add anything?
If you have a project specifically within the Western State Fire Manager's realm that is not $240,000, please reach out to us. There's still a high interest in your project, and so if we need to make a modification, we will, but please note that our interest is in the $240,000 types of projects. Keep in mind that you're not required to do a project in a single season of work. You can spread that over generally 3 seasons of work. So if you think that you've got a project that's $80,000, guess what? If you did it over 3 years, then you just made a $240,000 project. Okay? So.
Perfect. Okay, with that, we will move on to HFR, and Tyler will talk about the basis of that grant program.
The Hazard Fuel Reduction Program, or what was known as originally as Stevens, or CAFA for some who are have enough history in the program. These grants are specifically from the Forest Service, from their fuels budget, that are used to complement their efforts on adjoining lands, so private and state lands specifically. What we are looking for are projects that are going to complement federal projects and enhance what they are attempting to do management-wise on their side of the fence, with something that is comparable on the private or state side of the fence. We must have projects that are within 1.5 miles of that federal project. And you can utilize a little map exercise to figure that out, or if you don't know, reach out to your Forest Service counterparts to figure out where their projects are at, and just frankly ask them, I'm thinking about working here, is that within 1.5 miles of your project? So we're not talking about the treatment units, we are talking about the project boundaries. They are 2 very different things. So remember, it's the project boundary, not the treatment units for the Forest Service. Again, these projects must be explicitly identified in CWPPs. And they, for comparison's sake, on the thing I want to highlight here is 2. No match is required for HFR. So we have many cooperators that lean towards this funding type because the match is not required, though we highly encourage match be developed in the form of leverage. So we're not necessarily tracking it or submitting it as part of the reimbursements, but we are interested in having the landowners engage in some sort of effort so that they have ownership of their projects. The other is that we can only do specific project area education associated with HFR. So wherever your project is at, we're generally talking to the landowners that are explicitly and only within a designated boundary for that project area. So you're talking about how to develop a fire-resistant home or a fire-resistant landscape to those specific landowners within that project area, as opposed to general education, which can be done under Western State Fire Managers, meaning it is not project bound. Next, please. We're going to talk about a few nuances in the HFR application versus the Western State Fire Manager's application. So at the front end of the application, you will see that there are some instructions associated with the particular application. As Corey mentioned, there's not a specific guidance document that goes with how to populate the specific fields within this application. So for your benefit, again, the fields that are required are highlighted in red. And if you hover over them, they should, oh, not in this one. So down here in the budget, the greatest difference between the two applications is that you don't have to describe your budget like you do in Western State Fire Managers. You just need to populate some details on the dollar match and in kind. Again, that's going to be leverage. We must have the Forest Service project information in here in order to determine whether or not your project qualifies for this particular funding source. So make sure that you reach out to your Forest Service counterparts to obtain that information. As far as the layout of the particular application, it's a bit different. The project timeline falls on page 2 as opposed to page 3 of the application. So you're going to give me some details about how you're going to implement your project up front. And then as you work through the application, one of the other elements that does not exist is that you don't have to identify the integration or the identification of the project in the CWPP and how it meets the state forest action plan. So that box does not exist in this application. Rather, it is a checkbox up on page 2. So that's the major differences in the two applications. And again, if you have questions about that, please feel free to reach out to Corey or I, and we'll be more than happy to walk you through any questions that you may have.
Okay. With that, that concludes the presentation portion of today's webinar. We have been, or Tyre has been monitoring the Zoom group chat and following up on questions that have been asked so far. I am going to hand it back over to Tyre, and back and forth we'll work through some of these questions for you.
All right, so we had a question that popped up from Elaine asking, with the 50,000 population threshold, how do we basically find money to implement projects in these larger communal areas? And I'm going to let Corey answer that since she's dove into many funding sources that may provide some assistance.
If you live in a population area or you're looking at doing a project in a population area with greater than 50,000 people, please reach out to me. I would love to further discuss that type of project with you, what that project encompasses, what your objectives are, what the end goal is. I have put quite a bit of time into researching different funding opportunities. And I've been working on compiling them all into a document. It's not ready to be shared yet, but I can still share what's in it with you via conversation, or we can even do a screen share and we can look at a few other options that I've found. These are not options that we administer here at IDL, but for information sharing purposes, there's probably something out there that would fit your project. We just have to do a little digging. So for that question, if you have a project you want to do that doesn't fit in these grants and you're struggling to find funds, please feel free to reach out to me and I will do what I can to help you find a pot of money for that.
Thank you, Corey. Another question that came up was CWPPs and how often are they supposed to be updated? Realistically, they're supposed to be updated every 5 years, but in reality, it's closer to 10 or 15 years. What we'd really, really like to see happen is that the document is opened up and looked at annually to determine whether or not any projects have been implemented, completed, or if new projects need to be added to the particular running list that's within contained within that document. As far as how we go about updating that, if it's a standalone CWPP, I'm able to help facilitate those discussions. If the plan is integrated into the county hazard mitigation plan, then that plan requires to be updated every 5 years. And so you're likely going to be pulled in to review that plan every 5 years, and likely an email will be sent to you annually to ask if you have any updates to make to the plan, because again, that is a requirement of the hazard mitigation plans that they are reviewed annually. Next question that came up is, it's how do you reach your IDL of more than 22,000. My understanding that we can only charge IDL on the first 25,000 of pass-through grant. So this is specific to indirect. So for IDL, we actually don't reach that 22,000, but it's a math calculation that just works. So please note that it's not all going into indirect. There is some other funding that gets moved around, but for calculation purposes and for ease of the reviewers, it's just a math calculation at this point. The email, an email of the PowerPoint to you, it's very, very large. So what we'll do is send an email out to everyone to let you know that it has posted, and you can grab it off of the website as opposed to trying to clog up our send files into your inbox, which you probably wouldn't appreciate because it's really large. Other questions?
We're going to scan through this chat box real quick just to make sure we haven't missed anybody's questions. That's a great question, actually. Tyra, you'll freeze right there. Why are the phone numbers the same? Oops. My honest answer, because I didn't change them. If you are in need of Tyra's contact information, I will go in and make those adjustments. And when we post this to the website, it will be on there. And honestly, if you are in need of getting a hold of Tyra, shoot me an email. I know that's not the most direct way to do it, but shoot me an email and I will send over his contact information. Or you can shoot him an email. That is his correct email address on there. I apologize for not adjusting the phone numbers on there. So to whoever asked that question, thank you. And I apologize for the faux pas on that one.
I just put my cell phone number into the chat box.
Perfect.
All right, it doesn't look like we have any other questions that have come up. We really appreciate your attendance today and look forward to engaging with you here in the very near future as you work on creating and establishing an application for submission into one of these programs.
I will put one last note in that the two resources we provided to you earlier in the presentation, and those two websites are here at the bottom of this slide if you had missed them previously. I will leave this slide up and we will leave this Zoom room open for a couple more minutes, and that way you can write down those websites if you choose to do so you can start your exploring. And with that, that is all we have for you today. And again, thank you. And we will hopefully be hearing from you all soon. Have a great rest of your day.
See y'all.